there, everyone. Ari Cross with Haven Horsemanship here, and I realized while doing these case study videos and starting to ride the horses in this EDIX saddle with the different shimming and pommel options that it would be a disservice to you all to not show you the continuous fitting that is not only possible but necessary when you're fitting your saddle to your horse. Because as much as I wish I could tell you that when you're doing your initial fitting that it's all going to work exactly how it looked, I'd be lying. So I want to be really, really open with you all and show you that even someone like myself, who is by no means a saddle fitting expert, I do a lot of things, kind of a woman of all trades. So this isn't my primary focus, but it is something I've had to look at quite a bit with horses because I've had so many horses with saddle fitting issues and behavior issues because of it. So I wanted to show you how I go about experimenting and how I go about figuring out the right fit. Obviously, this gets more complicated if you're a professional like myself who also have students riding these different horses, because they might feel something slightly different from you that you will need to compensate for. So as much as possible, I'll talk about that as well as it comes up. But for these first couple videos of showing you the continuous fitting that's going on here, it'll probably be more about me and what I'm feeling. Some of the horses I did get right the first or second time. Others, it took me three or four times to get it feeling right. And the glory of it is, odds are in a couple months I may be changing it again, just like you will. So I want to show you what that process looks like so that you're not taken aback by it or unnerved by it or discouraged by it. It's very natural and it happens to everyone. So I hope you find these videos helpful and have fun. Saddle fitting is both a science and an art. First, before we get into some of the case studies, following up to what we've already looked at in the case study videos as far as how the initial fitting is working out for some of the horses, I want to talk about what to look for. So first, we're going to talk about the quote-unquote science, the things that you can see. The first one is, does your saddle stay in position before and after your ride? What I mean by this is, does your saddle slide significantly forward or back? If it does, you're going to want to experiment further and change your saddle fit, either through changing the pommel, changing shimming, changing your cinch of girth. I always recommend riding with a breastplate when riding treeless. So if you haven't been using one, consider adding one of those too. The next part of the science of what you can see when assessing your saddle fit is your saddle balanced back to front before and after your ride? So we already talked about the initial fit, but make sure that once your horse moves around a bit, trot and canter them without you on them first, make sure your saddle's staying in place, and then also look after your ride and make sure, is it starting to tip forward? Is it starting to tip back more? And both of those are things that you would want to change some of your saddle fit around to address if they're happening. Another important one is your saddle even right to left before and after your ride? So just like you're looking at whether your saddle is sliding forward or back, if it's tipping forward or back, you also want to look at, is your saddle even between right and left? A great way to see that is look at your stirrups from the front of your horse. Are they even? Look at the front of your pommel. Make sure the middle of your pommel is lined up with the midline of your horse's neck and wither, often where their mane is. Also look at the cantle of the saddle. Is the middle of it, very helpfully noted on the EDIX saddles by their logo, is it lined up with your horse's spine? Again, before and after your ride. So those first three science points were about things to do with the saddle on. Once you've removed the saddle, you want to look at, are the sweat or wear marks even on your horse's back and the bottom of the saddle pad after your ride? So you want to look at, are there any areas where the hair has been rubbed back and forth? Has it been disturbed at all? And then look at the bottom of your saddle pad and make sure that there aren't areas of the saddle pad that are mussed differently than other areas.
So those first four cover our science. Now we want to look at the art. The bottom line is there can be several different options with pommels, with your shims, with girth or cinch, with a certain breastplate, etc., that may look right, that may check the boxes off, but that doesn't mean it's going to feel right. So the last thing you want to consider is how does it feel for you and your horse. I highly recommend watching the initial case study that launched this series, Uno and the Corville GP saddle, because it talks about some of those feel things from the point of view of your horse. What are some subtle signals your horse might be giving that indicate that the saddle fit isn't as ideal as it could be? So you want to look at how does it feel for you and how does it feel for your horse and adjust based on those as well. Just like in the pommel sizing video, we're going to go in order of the horses in the case study videos, just to keep it simple. So just like in the case studies, I'm not going to show those 4 science points and the art point for every single horse. I'm only going to talk about the ones that I took into consideration. I'm always looking at all 5 of those points. But this video would be incredibly long if I addressed all of them with each horse. So I'm only going to be talking about the ones that changed our saddle fit. So for Moose, the uphill horse with a predominant wither, the pommel we decided on was the extra small, and the question we had was shimming. We knew we needed help in the middle and back pockets on both sides because he's quite uphill. What I wasn't sure about is whether we wanted 1 or 2 shims. So from the case studies, you'll remember this is the image I created showing the saddle balance without shims as the lowest line, the lightest colored line. The middle line and kind of orangish brown line is the saddle balance with 1 shim. And the dark brown line, the top one, is saddle balance with 2 shims. So from a scientific perspective, from those 4 science points, definitely that top line is the closest and is actually balanced. We do run the risk of over shimming, meaning that we can use too many shims and therefore cause a teeter-totter effect. So, for example, with Moose and uphill horse, when we start without any shims, too much of the weight is on the back of the saddle. It's tipped down. If we put too many shims in, we can tip it the other way and end up putting too much pressure on the front of the saddle. So I experimented with both 1 and 2 shims. Here are some pictures of Moose's back after a ride with 1 shim in each of the pockets. And you'll see the saddle doesn't look like it slid too far back, which is good. That's improvement for him. But his hair is still more compressed towards the back of the saddle, meaning that there may still be more weight on the back of the saddle. These pictures show the saddle pad after riding Moose with 1 shim, and same thing, you'll see the merino wool at the back of the pad is more compressed than at the front. So this is why I did decide to do 2 shims, and that has worked out much better. There's even compression of his hair and of the wool with 2 shims, and he seems a little bit happier too. Now we're moving on to Artie, the horse with a dip in his back, and who, remember, also has some imbalance between right and left. So in our initial fit, he was fit with a large pommel, and the shimming I decided to try first was a little bit odd. 1 shim in front, middle, and back on the left, and 1 shim middle and back on the right. So here I was looking at trying to fix address the dip in his back more so than differences between right and left, but was starting to look at differences between right and left by shimming only the front on the left to see if that helped balance out the rider a little bit more. Let's see how it went. So again, always look at your saddle after your ride. Here is Artie, where he's the one who leans quite a bit to the left. I did not compensate for that this ride. I was more concerned about getting the back to front adjusted. Back to front felt pretty good, but definitely still crooked. So he's looking for food. So we will next time do the same shimming pattern, which for him was both back, both middle, and just left side on his shoulder. But next time what I think we'll do is try on the right side, 1 shim on the back, 1 shim in the middle. On the left side, 2 shims in the back, 2 shims in the middle, and then still that 1 on his shoulder, and see how it feels. Huge improvement for Artie though, the saddle did not slide. So this is again after our ride, and you'll see that EDIX logo is still right in the middle over his spine. He has had tremendous saddle slipping issues. Where the saddle, if everything isn't just right, you know, the saddle placement, the pad, the cinch or the girth, it will slide off pretty far to the left, and you'll have to get off and fix it. So sliding fixed. Now we need to balance his left to right a little bit better. As you saw in the video clip, the saddle stayed quite well positioned, but here is the view of the stirrups from the front. You'll see that the left stirrup is significantly lower. This is why when riding Artie, you feel like you might slide right off his left side. Here is what the bottom of the saddle pad looked like after Artie's ride in our initial fit setup. You'll see there's quite a bit more compression and movement of the wool on the right side of the pad. This, I believe, meant that there was too much pressure on the right side because that's the side of his back that tends to be higher. So it means we need to shim more on the left side. It did not show as much on his back, but it showed very clearly on the saddle pad. Here is a picture of the level of the stirrups after a ride, where I removed the 1 shim from the front pocket on the left. I decided that there wasn't a big enough gap there to justify shimming, that the saddle would conform to that gap. So I took that shim out. I had 1 shim in the middle pocket on the right and the back pocket on the right to address the dip in his back and the fact that he's slightly uphill. And then I did 2 shims on the left in the middle pocket and the back pocket. And you can see here, the left stirrup almost looks slightly high in this one. The feel was much better. I felt balanced. Here it looks slightly high, but I felt good, and Artie felt good too. He was able to canter better on his right lead than he's been able to in quite a while. And here are views of Artie's back that day. You can see the compression and any movement of his hair is pretty even between left and right. There wasn't anything really of note to see on the saddle pad, so no pictures of that, but his back looked nice and even. Next, we'll look at Rhea, the downhill horse. The pommel selected for her was the large, and our initial fit, we decided to use 1 shim in both front pockets and both middle pockets. It's really helpful to look at your saddle right after a ride. So this is Rhea, the most downhill horse here. And you'll see that I might need 2 shims up front. So maybe 2 shims up front, 1 shim in the middle, because I did feel slightly rocked forward. And you can see here, it does look like the pommel might be slightly lower. She's going off to touch a cone because she's not sure why I'm not telling her to do something. Good girl! So always look at your saddle after a ride once you've done a change, and even just in general to make sure you aren't missing anything.
Next, we're looking at Champ. Remember, he's the horse who had the most significant imbalance between left and right. So he was originally fitted for the large pommel, and originally we looked at 1 shim all the way down the right side, so a shim in the front, in the middle, and at the back. You'll see pictures of that, and then also that I tried 1 shim just in the middle and the back on the right. And then what we landed on as the best fit is 2 shims all the way down the right side, and you'll see pictures of each of those. Here is Champ with our initial fit after a ride. You'll see the stirrups are still quite uneven, so we did not do enough. Here I wanted to try taking the shim out of the front pocket before trying more shims. And as you can see, the stirrups were worse. So he definitely is dropped through his shoulder as well on his right side. So this decided that yes, he does need shimming on his shoulder as well.
So here's the saddle on Champ. You can see sitting really, really nicely. And what's even more amazing, is look at how evenly the stirrups are falling. This has never been the case before, and as you know from seeing the pictures and other videos,
no other setup has done this before, so that's very exciting and so much more comfortable for horse and rider to have everything sitting square even though he's crooked. Good boy. And also an amazing change, he's standing not entirely square because I'm letting him eat. But you'll see the EDIX logo is right over his spine. That does not happen in any other setup. It's usually off considerably to the right, as I've shown.
Next we have Tiki. Remember, she's flat-backed and has a forward girth area. So initially I did not shim her, but then saw how the saddle was starting to tip forward on her because she has a flat back and the forward girth area. So did decide to try one shim in the front pocket and middle pocket on both sides. That has worked pretty well, and you'll see a picture of it in just a moment. I do still plan to try the extra large pommel, because if you remember from her measurements in the estimating pommel size video, she's pretty close to the measurements for the large pommel. So the more shims we put up front, the wider we need the pommel to be. So we may try the extra large pommel with 2 shims up front to further keep the saddle from rocking forward. Here is Tiki after a ride with the current setup, which is the large pommel and 1 shim in both front pockets and both middle pockets. Overall, this looks pretty good. As you can see, the saddle does still tend to want to slide back a little bit and want to tip forward a little bit, again, because of how flat back she is and the fact that she has a more forward girth area. So that's why we might try 2 shims up front and the extra large pommel next. But overall, I think this current setup works for her. She seems a lot more comfortable than in previous setups. So we will try one more and then decide from there. The last horse we're going to take a look at in this video is Woody. So Woody is one that I was pretty torn about. He was fitted with the average pommel, and initially, in his initial fit, we looked at a shim in both middle pockets and both back pockets. Remember, he has the most significant dip in his back of the horses here. I rode in that, and I felt way too tipped forward. I don't have any pictures of it because, to be honest, there wasn't a whole lot you could see. There wasn't a whole lot of the science there. The saddle didn't look overly tipped forward, but I felt tipped forward. So we switched to just 1 shim in the middle pockets on both sides, and that felt good. So next you're going to see some pictures of that. As I said, I don't have a picture from after a ride with the initial setup, but as a reminder, here is the still from the case studies video showing how nicely balanced the saddle was with shims in the back 2 pockets and the middle 2 pockets. Like I said, rode in this and it just felt too tipped forward to me, so that's why we went back to just the middle pockets. Here is the Corville on Woody after a ride with just shims in the 2 middle pockets. And as you can see, saddle's nicely balanced, didn't slide back too much, everything felt very comfortable. So this is the fit that I would recommend for him, the average pommel and 1 shim in the middle pockets on each side. So here is the view of the stirrups on Woody with 1 shim in the middle pocket on both sides. I do not feel a significant right-left imbalance on him, but you'll see by my stirrups that there is a slight difference. So that is something to take into consideration as you are working your horse and as you're riding them, to make sure you're developing them equally on both sides. Because even though he doesn't have an imbalance that I can feel or that we seem to be able to measure as far as shimming, he does have a slight difference, and that's something to take into account in his workout.
Thank you for joining me for this continuous fitting video. We'll see if there's more in the future, but I hope at least this one was valuable to you and helpful. Again, I don't want anyone to feel like the very first time they ride after fitting the saddle to their horse that it'll feel magical and beautiful. It might not. And that doesn't mean that the saddle itself isn't for you or that it's not going to fit. I can almost guarantee we're going to make it comfortable for you and your horse. Again, with 10 different horses here, I'm finding it quite possible to make it comfortable for all of the horses and myself, far more comfortable than the options that I was using before. So know that it is possible, and you just have to keep experimenting. If something doesn't feel right, especially if it's not feeling right for a couple rides, then experiment some more. Contact me, contact EDIX directly or contact whatever dealer you used to buy your saddle, and I'm sure that they will be able to help you to fit the saddle to yourself and your horse even better. So I will keep you posted on if there's further videos. But if not, thank you for joining me, and I hope that all these were helpful for you, and I look forward to seeing you in the future for other videos.